Is Trump on the brink of collapse? It certainly seems so. It's incredibly ironical. He's busy flexing military muscle against Iran. Behind the scenes, his position is actually growing increasingly shaky. Just imagine, more than 70 members of Congress have already united to oust him, deeming him no longer competent. But what's most shocking, it's not just politicians changing sides, but his own loyal supporters. Ex-MAGA regret videos are trending everywhere, proving that the solid narrative he built was just a facade. These cracks are too deep to cover up. But there's one plot twist that's far more ironic than all of this. Curious. A controversial decision to go to war. The decision by Donald Trump to go to war with Iran has raised major questions from the very beginning. It is not merely a matter of who is right or wrong in the conflict, but goes deeper than that. How could such a momentous decision be made without the full approval of the United States Congress? In the U.S. democratic system, war is not a unilateral decision. There are mechanisms, there are checks and balances, and there is a role for Congress that should be involved before the first bullet is fired. But in this case, many members of Congress actually felt left out. They only received an explanation after the attack had taken place. It was as if the decision was already final, and Congress was merely a spectator. This is what subsequently sparked a wave of criticism. But the controversy didn't end there. What further inflamed the situation were the extreme statements made by Trump himself. One of the most attention-grabbing remarks was when he said that a civilization could be wiped out overnight. This statement was not only considered an exaggeration, but also sparked serious concerns, both domestically and globally. For many politicians in Washington, this is no longer merely tough rhetoric. It is seen as a dangerous signal from a president who holds control over the world's largest military force. Some members of Congress even described the statement as a sign of instability in decision-making. It was from this point that the push for impeachment began to gain momentum. First, a very pointed narrative has emerged that the president is no longer fit to carry out his duties. This is no trivial accusation. In the context of American politics, statements like this typically arise only during major crises, when more than a dozen members of Congress begin voicing the same sentiment. It signals that confidence in the leadership is at a low point. Second, allegations of abuse of power have begun to surface. The decision to initiate a conflict without congressional approval is considered a violation of the Constitution. This is compounded by potential violations of the laws of war, particularly regarding threats to civilian infrastructure such as power plants and bridges. Legal experts assess that such actions could constitute a violation of international law if actually carried out. This is not merely a matter of domestic politics. It has already entered the realm of global law. Third, talk of invoking the 25th Amendment has begun to surface. This amendment is rarely invoked and is typically discussed only under extreme circumstances. When the president is deemed physically or mentally unable to perform his duties, however, this mechanism is now frequently mentioned in political discussions and the media. Fourth, there have been proposals to form a special commission tasked with assessing the president's capacity. This is a softer approach compared to the 25th Amendment, but it still indicates that concerns have reached a serious level. This commission is proposed to conduct a comprehensive evaluation, covering both cognitive function and decision-making ability. Interestingly, this proposal is not coming solely from the opposition. There are even voices within the Republican Party itself that are beginning to support this idea. This indicates that concerns regarding Trump's leadership are no longer purely partisan in nature. All these developments paint a broader picture. Layered political pressure. For Trump, this is an extremely difficult test. Fractures within the ranks. Fractures within the ranks are no longer just minor signs. They are now clearly visible on the surface. When millions took to the streets in the No Kings protests, many thought that was the peak. But it wasn't. The next wave emerged with a sharper slogan, "Hands off." These protests have spread widely, from major cities to small towns across various states, and even overseas. The scale is massive, the message simple, a rejection of Donald Trump's war policies and leadership style. Yet, what is even more surprising comes from within his own circle of supporters. Several major figures within the MAGA ecosystem began speaking out, and their tone was no longer merely mild criticism. Tucker Carlson openly called this decision to go to war evil. Other figures, such as Marjorie Taylor Greene, have even called Trump crazy and accused him of betraying his America First campaign promise. This isn't opposition. These are the very people who once stood at the forefront of his support. Going even further, some of them are beginning to push for an extreme option, the 25th Amendment. In other words, it's not just the policies that are being questioned, but the leadership itself. This is a level of criticism that is extremely rare within a typically solid base like MAGA. The situation heated up further when Trump responded in a way that only made matters worse. He lashed out at figures he had once praised to the skies. These disparaging remarks toward his longtime supporters created the impression that the relationship between the leader and his base was beginning to crack seriously. Carlson didn't stay silent either. He countered by suggesting that Trump was under immense pressure, even implying that external influences were at play in the decision regarding the war. At this point, the conflict is no longer between the government and the opposition. It is transformed into a conflict within the movement itself, and often, this is the hardest to resolve. Public and voter reactions. Public reaction to this war has also been swift, and the trend is not entirely favorable to Donald Trump. One of the most attention-grabbing voices came from a global moral authority, Pope Leo XIV. He openly called the war unjust, even bordering on a war crime, and asserted that this conflict solves nothing. Furthermore, he directly appealed to the American people to pressure Congress to end the war. This statement is not merely criticism, it is a moral pressure resonating globally. Domestically, equally compelling dynamics are unfolding among voters themselves. On social media, particularly TikTok, a wave of videos has begun to emerge from Trump supporters expressing regret. Those who were once vocal in their support are now questioning the war decision, which they view as inconsistent with the America First pledge. Ironically, while the official narrative still claims strong support, the reality on the ground reveals growing doubt. At this point, the war no longer feels distant in the Middle East. Its impact is beginning to be felt in the kitchen, at work, and in the future of the voters themselves. Mounting pressure on Trump. Pressure on Donald Trump is now coming from all directions, and it all feels like it's happening at once. Domestically, Congress continues to apply political pressure, while the public takes to the streets and begins to lose confidence. On the global stage, criticism is also growing more vocal, with even allies speaking out. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez sharply remarked that the world will not applaud those who set the world on fire, and then come running with a bucket. This statement reflects international unease. Furthermore, allies like the United Kingdom are beginning to voice concerns about the economic impact of the war. This combination of political, public, global, and diplomatic pressure is creating a situation that is becoming increasingly difficult to control. A contrasting reality. Amid such immense pressure, there is one reality that stands in stark contrast. While calls for impeachment and invoking the 25th Amendment are growing louder, the chances of either actually happening remain very slim. The process is complex, requires massive political support, and so far there are no signs that those conditions have been met. In other words, this crisis is real, but a way out is not easy. Donald Trump is now at a critical juncture, under attack from all sides, yet still clinging to the system that protects him. The question now hangs in the balance. Will he be able to weather the storm, or will he instead crumble slowly, from within his own camp?